All right, so I've been to 17 countries in the past year, and I thought it would be fun to just go through each one and say the very first word that comes to mind. So first off, we have Canada, and the first word I think of when I think of Canada is poutine. Now this one was kind of a stereotype I had in my head even before coming to Canada, and I don't want this video to just be stereotypes, but after spending a month in Montreal, I gotta say there's a lot of poutine there. We didn't eat that much of it, but I do remember it being on a lot of menus. It's especially prevalent at more casual restaurants and pub type places. And I gotta say, out of everywhere I've been, Canada is probably the country where I have the strongest association between that country and one particular dish. Like I can think of, many great Bulgarian dishes or Malaysian dishes or Japanese dishes, but for Canada, I still, even after spending a month there, I still don't really know what Canadian cuisine is beyond poutine. All right, so after Canada, we went to Bulgaria, and the first word I thought of for Bulgaria was mountains. So when we got to Bulgaria, one of the very first things that stood out to me was this big, beautiful pedestrian boulevard with this great view of Vitasha mountain. And this mountain is like right next to the city, and this was a very new thing for me. Like, I thought it was just so cool that you could take a taxi for 15 minutes from the city center and then go hiking. And this association is totally based on my past experiences. So I spent most of my life in the United States in the Midwest region, which is completely flat. Like, the elevation changes are very minimal. There's barely so much as a hill for hundreds of kilometers. So, just very flat place, no mountains. I'm not used to seeing mountains. And now that I've been traveling for so long, I'm used to seeing mountains all over the place now. But when I got to Bulgaria, seeing a mountain right next to the city really was like a new and novel thing for me. And it's not just Vitasha. So much of this country is covered in mountains. Every time we went somewhere for a weekend or went on a day trip, I always loved just looking out the window and seeing all the mountains. And one of my strongest visual memories from this whole journey so far is riding a horse through the Balkan Mountains. I think Bulgaria is just an incredibly beautiful country and really doesn't get enough attention. The next country we visited was Turkey, and the first word that comes to mind is salesman. Now keep in mind, we were only in Turkey for 4 days, and it was all in Istanbul, but this was the first time in our travels where I really experienced aggressive salesmen on a daily basis, almost an hourly basis. And I'm not being overly sexist with this term here. I'm not gonna say salespeople because it was entirely men, right? Like, you go to a market and all the men are trying real hard to get you to buy something from them. And then you go to a touristy street and everyone's trying real hard to get you to go to their bar or their restaurant or their club. And it just gets exhausting trying to make a decision and just constantly having someone be like, come with me, no, come with me, no, come with me, no, come with me. Now, this kind of aggressive salesmanship happens in a lot of touristy places. It's just more on my mind for Turkey because for most of this journey, we've mostly just been trying to live among the locals in more residential neighborhoods where people don't really bother you that much. But when we went to Turkey, that was more of a vacation, and we had more of a typical tourist experience than we had in most other places. Now, what I've said so far about Turkey and Canada are absolutely not fair representations of those countries. And in this video, I'm not trying to come up with fair representations of any country. I literally just wrote all the countries I'd been to in the past year on a piece of paper, and then wrote the very first word that popped into my head, whatever that happened to be. So keep in mind, this is all just based on my personal experience, based on where Lexi and I happen to go, what we happen to do, who we happen to meet, and yeah, I'm just saying basically what is my strongest association with each of these countries. So keep in mind, it's a personal perspective, and try not to get too offended if you're from any of these countries. All right, moving on. Italy, pizza. This is easily the quickest I thought of a word to associate with any country on this list. We spent almost a month last year in Napoli, which is the birthplace of pizza, and a city I still think has the greatest pizza in the world. The number of pizzerias there that will give you such a high quality pizza is out of this world. You know, I felt like I was never more than maybe a block or two away from one of the best pizzas I'll ever have in my life. So we spent 23 nights in Napoli, and I had 23 pizzas. And yes, there's a lot of other great Italian food out there, but after that month we spent in Napoli, I will never not think of pizza immediately when I think about Italy. Next one, Switzerland. Expensive. I wasn't even sure if I should put this in here since we were only in Switzerland for like 2 hours. Basically, we were on a tour around Lake Como in Italy, and they dropped us off in Lugano, Switzerland for a bit of an afternoon. And it was noticeable how much more expensive things were there. Like even just getting a coffee or a soda or something, we were just like, holy crap, everything is so much cheaper right across the border in Italy. All right, the next country we went to was Germany, and the first thing that popped into my head actually wasn't a word, it was the song lyrics, ein Prosit der Gemütlichkeit. So the reason we went to Germany was to go to Oktoberfest, and if you've ever been there, you know this song. So there's a live band in every tent, and every band plays the same song. I don't know how often, but it felt like it was like 2 or 3 times per hour. Like they played this song constantly, and it's so much fun. By the end of the night, you're just surrounded by thousands of drunk people standing on their seats or even on the tables, liters of beer in hand, just singing this song so passionately. Yeah, I've never really experienced anything quite like Oktoberfest, and this song really goes hand in hand with that experience. Real quick before I continue, there's a like button under this video, and if you've made it this far, please consider clicking it. I put a lot of effort into making these videos, and clicking that button really helps this spread to more people, so I'd really appreciate it. All right, so after Germany, we went to Czechia, and the first word I thought of was unpretentious. Now, for those who don't know what country I'm talking about, it's officially called the Czech Republic, and I think that's still what most people know it as. But for the past 8 years, they've been trying to rebrand their informal name as Czechia, so that's what I'm gonna call it. So I've been to 15 European countries so far, and this one is my favorite in Europe. So part of why I like this country so much is because it feels so chill, so casual, and I just feel so comfortable being myself. Like I never feel like I'm gonna be judged in any way. And I'm gonna contrast it with Paris real quick. So we spent a month in Prague, and I've often heard that referred to as the Paris of Central Europe. And sure, like there are some similarities between Prague and Paris, but I feel very different in Prague than I do in Paris. You know, Paris feels like such a fashion epicenter, and that kind of thing kind of permeates through the culture. Like I get the sense that people feel like they need to look and dress a certain way in order to fit in. And I feel like Prague has a lot of the best parts about Paris, but without the judgment. Like I feel completely comfortable just walking around with a boring old t-shirt and shorts or whatever. I never feel like I'm gonna be judged. Everyone in Prague and in Czechia in general is just so friendly and accepting. And I can't say I've seen a ton of this country, but I've been to Kutná Hora, I've been to Český Krumlov. These places are much smaller than Prague, but I still feel just as comfortable, you know, just as happy in those places as I do in the big city. All right, moving on to another country where the first word I think of is totally a stereotype. So when I think of Romania, the first word I think of is Dracula. And this one I don't feel bad about because the country totally did this to itself, or at least in the Transylvania region where we spent most of our time. And this is one where I actually didn't have this association going into my visit to Romania. So I've never read Dracula. I know there's a million movies and TV shows, and I don't know if I'd ever seen any of them. And really, Dracula has nothing to do with Romania. It's a fictional character made up by an Irish author who's never even been to Romania. But despite this, there's just so much Dracula stuff catering to tourists in Transylvania. And it's all really grasping at straws. So first of all, there are some restaurants that are literally called like Dracula restaurant or whatever. We didn't go to any of these, and I can't imagine they're any good, but even when we were at a non-Dracula restaurant and we asked the server what he recommended, he was like, try the Dracula fries, which are just fries with some like sort of spicy red sauce on them to make them look bloody. And when you go to a small town like Sigishwara, they make such a big deal about how this is Dracula's hometown. Like there are signs about it everywhere. And that's just because Vlad the Impaler was born in Sigishwara, who's the guy who Dracula was supposedly based off of. But it turns out there's actually no evidence that the character Dracula was based on this person to begin with. But the stupidest thing I saw by far was Dracula's castle outside of Brasov. So it's actually called Bran Castle, but they went really hard trying to brand it as Dracula's castle. And again, this thing has nothing to do with Dracula. The book and the movies never mention this castle. The description of Dracula's castle in the books has nothing to do with how this castle actually looks. And even Vlad the Impaler has never even been to this castle. Calling this thing Dracula's castle is purely a marketing stunt, and it's not even a good castle. It's actually kind of ugly. None of the furniture, nothing inside is the stuff that was actually there when it was used as a castle. I guess just is not a good castle. And there are great castles in the region. Like Pelish Castle, for example, is stunningly beautiful inside and out. All of the original furniture and decorations are still there. Like it feels like a castle. It feels like stepping back in time. But Bran Castle or Dracula's castle just feels like some stupid tourist exhibit. And I haven't even seen the whole extent of this. So there's a Wikipedia page called Dracula Tourism that goes into this a bit more. And honestly, I get why they're doing this. Like, I feel like Romania is generally a country that kind of flies under the radar, and I'm sure the Dracula thing does boost tourism numbers a bit, but I still think it's kind of dumb. Okay, rant over. Next we have France, and the word is bread. After that we have Thailand, and the word I thought of was outdoors. For a few reasons. So we spent the month of January in northern Thailand, and it was by far the most I've ever been outdoors in January. Keep in mind, I'm from Chicago, which has very cold winters, so January is a month where everyone stays inside. This was also the first month where we didn't have our dog with us, so we had more freedom to just go wherever we wanted, whenever we wanted, which naturally led to us doing more outdoorsy things. But also most of our meals were outdoors, most of the things we did were outdoors. Like we just spent a lot of time outside that month, which was awesome. And also there are just so many plants everywhere in Chiang Mai. Like even just walking through the streets felt so much more outdoorsy than it did just walking outside in any European city we went to. All right, moving a bit farther south, we have Malaysia. And when I tried to think of a word to associate with Malaysia, my brain kind of spat out two things simultaneously, almost like they were battling for the #1 spot. So I'm gonna talk about both of them, and that is food and Chinese New Year. So let's start with food. Malaysia is the best food country I have ever been to. And I don't have any caveats here. I'm not gonna say, well, the food is great for the price or anything like that. Like, no, the food is just incredible. Even if it were to cost 10 times as much, I would still say the food tastes incredible. And a lot of this is based in Georgetown, where we spent most of our time. And Georgetown is a city where I felt like I could just go into any random hawker center, go up to a random cart and just order anything, and the meal would be amazing. From more than one cuisine too. Like obviously I had a lot of good Malay food there, but also some great Thai food, Indian food. Oh my God, the Indian food is top notch. I've never really been to any other country where I can think of so many different meals I had where I'm just like, that one was a total banger. And don't even get me started on the fresh fruit juice. So I've probably had apple juice like hundreds of times throughout my life. but I felt like I was rediscovering it for the first time when I had fresh green apple juice in Malaysia. And then I started ordering it like multiple times a week. And also umbrella juice, I became borderline addicted to fresh umbrella juice, which is a fruit I had never even heard of before I came to Malaysia. Now, the other strong association I have with Malaysia is Chinese New Year. So like I said, we spent a month in Georgetown, which has a majority Chinese population, and we happened to be there in February during Chinese New Year. Like, we didn't really plan it that way, it just kind of happened to work out that way. And I had no idea what I was in for when we arrived. The Chinese New Year celebrations might be some of the most vivid, like, cultural memories from this entire journey so far. Especially like the fireworks. They lasted for weeks. There were fireworks going off for weeks, like all day and night, just random people shooting them off all over the place. It was so cool. And then, of course, there were the official celebrations, which were a spectacle. I lost count of how many snake dances and dragon dances and fire dances and all sorts of performances we saw. And again, the fireworks. So we went to this one festival where the fireworks were just kind of integrated throughout the festival. Like, it wasn't like you have the people here and then you have the fireworks over there at the end of the night. The fireworks were just kind of integrated throughout the whole festival, just all over the street. You'd have just fireworks going off within the crowd and like between buildings, it's going off real high, and then the ashes raining down on the crowd. I can't even put into words what it was like to be at this festival. And this is one of like 5 different celebrations we went to for Chinese New Year. All right, so after Malaysia, we went to Singapore, and the word that I thought of was perfect, but with kind of a negative connotation. So the moment we entered the country, we were in an airport that was not only beautiful, but also kind of eerily efficient. Then we got into the city, and it was so green, it was so clean, it's so walkable, the trains are so convenient and efficient. The people are very respectful. You have many different races of people just living together, seemingly without being too segregated. This country just feels like a very well-oiled machine that just works. Everything feels so predictable and so safe. It's the only place I've been where I truly felt like I could leave an expensive laptop or a camera on a table in a cafe or in a public space, and it would still be there hours later when I got back. Aside from the high cost of living, everything in Singapore just feels so perfect, at least on the surface. But there's a downside to this as well. Because the country developed so quickly, it doesn't feel like a place that evolves naturally with some rich history. It feels more like a master plan, and it feels like something is missing when everything works so well and the punishment for not following the rules is so severe. Life is just a little less colorful. There are certain intangible things that kind of get lost. A lot of the great joys in life, especially while traveling, come from imperfections. And when you wipe away some of those imperfections, you also wipe away some of what makes us human. Now, would I ever want to live in Singapore? Yeah, I totally would. Especially as I get older, I could see myself craving more stability and predictability. I think it's probably a great place for many people to live, but I also think it's less of an exciting place to travel to. Moving around Southeast Asia a little more, we have Vietnam, and the first thing I thought of wasn't actually a word, it was a sound, which is beep beep. Like the short double honking of a horn. That's the first thing I thought of when I thought of Vietnam. So I've been to Vietnam twice, and one of the first things I noticed both times was just how many motorbikes there are on the road. There are some normal cars, but the vast majority of the traffic you see is some sort of two-wheeled motorized vehicle. And yes, this is a thing all over Southeast Asia. It's not just Vietnam, but Vietnam kind of takes it to a whole new level. It's not uncommon to see people on motorcycles hauling around literal appliances like a washing machine or a refrigerator on their motorcycle. It's actually kind of incredible to watch. And one thing that really stands out about Vietnam that I haven't really noticed in the neighboring countries as much is the honking culture. So the streets are very loud and everyone's constantly honking at each other all the time. But it's not like a rude long honk like you might hear if you cut someone off on the highway. It's more of a respectful, just like a beep beep. Just everyone's constantly weaving out of each other on the street. Like it just kind of feels like chaos, and it's just kind of this respectful honk to just be like beep beep, like, hey, just be aware, I'm here. And I actually found this to be really useful, even as someone who doesn't ride a motorbike. When Lexi and I were just riding regular bicycles around the streets in Hoi An, or outside of Hoi An, it was super useful. Just whenever someone came up behind us, they would just beep beep. It really helped us get a sense of where the vehicles were around us when we were on bicycles. All right, moving on to East Asia. The first place we went was Japan, and the word I most associate with Japan is toilets. Now, before I went, I thought Japanese toilets were kind of a meme. Like, oh my God, they're so high tech and they have so many buttons and they shoot water into your butthole. And I figured, okay, maybe I'll occasionally see a toilet like that. But it's real. Most of the toilets really are like that. They really do have all the fancy buttons and bidets. It doesn't matter if you're at an expensive hotel or a cheap one, or Buddhist temple on a mountain, or a public park, or a super casual restaurant. Like everywhere, all of the toilets, every toilet I saw for 3 weeks except one really had a bunch of buttons and a bidet. Some of them even have a speaker that'll play sounds if you press the right button. A lot of them have heated seats, and some of them have various temperature settings. Some of them even have a butt dryer. It'll dry your butt for you. It's great. These things really are marvelous. And ever since leaving Japan, not a day has gone by where I didn't wish I could sit on a Japanese toilet. All right, let's talk about South Korea. The first word that comes to mind is appearances. This feels like a country where people care more about their appearance than anywhere else I've been. One thing I learned is that it's common and generally expected for Koreans to put their photo on their resume. And for like an acting or a modeling job, that makes sense. But this is just for regular office jobs. It seems like being attractive essentially is more of a factor in getting hired in Korea than it is in most other countries I've been to. And I don't know if this is related or if it's totally a different thing, but one thing I noticed in the cities in Korea is so many little photo booth shops all over the place. Like in every neighborhood, there are so many of these places where you can go in and there's a bunch of costumes and props and stuff. And I haven't done it, but I imagine it's just like a photo booth where you take cute pictures of yourself and it prints them out. And back home, I understand this as some sort of novelty thing at like a wedding or some sort of event. But in Korea, every neighborhood we went to in both Seoul and Busan probably had like 10 to 20 of these photo booth stores. Even our residential neighborhood, like super residential out of the way neighborhood we stayed in Seoul, had at least a few of these. And like I can't imagine how much demand there is for photo booths in daily life to sustain all these businesses. Now, I have one more country to talk about, but before I continue, I'm curious whether anyone watching is from any of these countries. And if you are, leave a comment down below. I'm curious what you think about. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think about your own country? And finally, we have Laos, which is where I am right now. Hey, look, a temple. And the first word I thought of when I thought about Laos was trees. And I don't really know how to describe why. Like, obviously trees are a super universal thing. It might be because we recently just spent so much time in these huge mega cities, Tokyo, Seoul, Bangkok, just super tall buildings all over the place. And now that we're in a place that doesn't have skyscrapers, the trees really just stand out a whole lot more. But I think there's something more to it than just that. The plant life here in Luang Prabang just feels very rich. It's almost that jungly feeling I got in Chiang Mai, but at an even higher level. And especially the leaves. Some of the leaves are humongous. I feel like I've seen more enormous leaves here than I've seen anywhere else this year. and like take a look at our hostel. This hostel, this is where we've been staying for the past week, and it feels like it's about to be eaten up by the jungle. And this is very much in the city. This is not like some super out of the way place. Now, the only other country I've been to in the past year that I didn't mention is the United States. Which I'm not going to talk about because, well, that's my home. But there is one thing I associate with the US that I never really even thought about until I started traveling and until I left the country. So if you want to see what that is, check out this video. Whether or not you're American, I think what you see in there might surprise you. So yeah, go ahead and check that out, and I will see you in the next one.